How can India compete and outperform China? As published on nondetail.com. The journey of tea and the Genghis Khan's conquest of Beijing have some answers to it. Before we get into it, first let's ponder upon this question of why did China showcase aggression in Ladakh during pandemic. The situation seems to have de-escalated now. However, it is important for India to ask this question: why was there any aggression at all? Well, two questions: why and what? 1. Why? Why a conflict during pandemic? 2. What? What can India do from here? First, let me talk about why. Answering it in a single sentence, China tried to distract India's attention away from economy to national security and further deviated India's focus away from the sea to the Himalayas. And this is not the first time. This has been a very old strategy employed by China. Sometimes it does this through its client state Pakistan, or sometimes China does it directly. China has strategized this for three reasons. 1. China understands the value of Indian civilization. Both Chinese and Indian civilizations date back to thousands of years and both have competed and flourished all through. So, China believes in the potential of India in competing for that coveted superpower spot. Especially aftermath of pandemic, when investments were looking for a safe haven and were gushing away from China. And, India being a huge market with a significant high human resource capital, it may have become a potential destination for the investments. Because, there is only one other nation on this earth that can provide similar scale that of China, and it is India. So, China was eager to distract India away from the question of economy to the national security. No investment would prefer a warmongering destination. And this is exactly how the CCP, Chinese Communist Party, tried to portray India as, so as to protect its investments. This is evident when we compare Chinese media and the India media covering the recent conflict. The state-controlled media in China has underplayed it, while in India it was everywhere and across all the media channels. So, idea was that, when stakes get higher on the Indian side, India will be pushed into a desperate situation. Then it may lead into actions that are not in India's right interest. Also, the investments that were to come into the nation might just get diverted away, as investments look for stability. China also wanted to deviate India away from the sea to the Himalayas. India is a superior sea power when compared to China. India had an aircraft carrier well before China did, and even today India is a dominant naval force. While sea trade is of utmost importance to China for its oil supplies and exports with the Middle East and Europe. It has an ongoing conflict with Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, and Vietnam in the South China Sea. China is already gripping under sea conflicts with many nations in South China Sea. So, China wants to ensure that India is not added to this list and India's naval power is weakened by less investments due to diversion of focus and funds towards ground forces, resulting in a weakened force not strong enough to cut the China's trade routes, if ever India gets into this sea conflict. In 2016, almost 80% of China's oil imports passed through the South China Sea via the Strait of Malacca. India and Indonesia can block Malacca Strait whenever they want. Realizing which, China has been investing heavily on Belt and Road Initiative. Hence, China always tries to divert India away from sea to the mountains. China believes that it's destined to lead the world as it did during the medieval times. This philosophy is somewhat true within India as well, wherein a section of Indian society believes in Akhand Bharat and a Vishwa Guru Bharat. But in India, due to its democracy and its multi-party system, this idea remains as an idea and is restricted to the section which believes in it. Whereas in China, due to its single-party closed system, whatever CCP, Chinese Communist Party, believes would become the state's ideology. Apart from these, the PRC, People Republic of China, believes its time has now come to lead the world under Xi Jinping, the tall leader of China after Mao Zedong. This has been apparent with China flexing its muscle with all its neighboring nations and with the US. This is reflective in the art form as well, like the movie Wolf Warrior, the biggest action movie of China. China's very own Rambo, which was released during the heights of the Cold War. Some experts believe what China is indulging now is the wolf warrior diplomacy, which is aggression at all fronts. Xi Jinping has successfully cultivated hyper-nationalism among the Chinese audience through apps that talk about him and his vision, through certain syllabus on his thoughts being covered in schools, and through billboards across China. And even the Communist Party of China has all through brainwashed its citizens that supporting Chinese Communist Party, CCP, is equivalent of supporting the nation. CCP through its companies have signed the Belt and Road Initiative with about 70 countries, which in many ways is like the East India Company signing trade deals with India and other Asian countries on behalf of the Queen. I say this because the East India Company used force to colonize while the CCP's Belt and Road Initiative has coerced the countries into debt trap and then taken over a port in Sri Lanka, had negotiated with Kenya to enforce Chinese law in a certain region of Kenya, pushed Ecuador to sell oil at discounted rates. It has bribed its way through the leadership in these countries to gain these negotiations, like how East India Company had bribed some Indians to win certain wars in India to establish the colonial rule. Now let's move to the question, what can India do from here? To answer this, I will be telling two stories, one that of the journey of tea, and the other, Genghis Khan's conquest of Beijing. Journey of tea and thereby the learnings India have for handling today's Chinese economic might. Tea, one of the most popular drink, was not originally a beverage but was chewed like a vegetable since 6000 BC in Sichuan and Yunnan province in China and in Assam of India until 2500 BC. When the mythical Emperor Shennong drank hot water and accidentally tea leaves fell into it, he instantly felt the aroma and the energy of tea leaves. Since then, tea became an integral part of the Chinese culture. The Buddhist monks drank it to remain active during the meditation, and with the spread of Buddhism this tea culture too had spread from Burma to Siberia, to Japan and to the Middle East. Zen Buddhist monks took tea to Japan and a lot of Japanese felt addicted to this magical medicinal drink, and conducted the ceremonial tea parties which are still prevalent in Japan. Across the world, the tea is either called chai or tea. There is no other word to it in any other language. This terminology essentially stems from one alphabet which is pronounced as cha in Cantonese or Mandarin and pronounced as te in the Min dynasty. Wherever tea reached through land route, there they call it as cha, chai, and if it was traded through sea route it was referred to as tea. Dutch were the first Europeans who traded tea, while Portuguese reached China first near to Min, so only Portuguese call it as chai, while the rest of Europe refers to this drink as tea. Until the 17th century the tea meant green tea alone, after which Chinese learnt to ferment these leaves and make black tea out of it. When tea reached English, they felt that it was very expensive for something which is a bitter medicinal drink, so it didn't spread within England. However, in 1662 when Portuguese Princess Catherine of Braganza married King Charles II, Catherine being a tea lover, after the wedding the first thing she asked for was tea. Noticing this as a potential opportunity, the East India Company, which was created by the Charter of the Queen, gifted the couple with 1 kilo of tea. Soon the elite class of England wanted to sip tea just like the royals, and this tea habit spread across England. The tea export from China flourished, and along with silk and porcelain, tea was among the top exports of China. China, which was already a closed society, kept tea manufacturing more closely guarded and made riches from its export. Being a rich nation already, China didn't accept anything else other than silver and gold against tea exports, and thus very soon England was left with very little silver. But English needed their tea, so they came up with a cunning idea of trading addiction with another addiction. By this time East India Company was ruling Bengal after winning the Battle of Plassey, and they had dwindled the riches of Bengal. Bengal, which was at 12% of global GDP, was now on the brink of famine. But the English masters did nothing, so around 10 million people in Bengal and Bihar died due to starvation. What we now call as the Great Bengal Famine of 1770. 6% of Bengalis died, and this left large portions of the land vacant. Many cultivated lands were abandoned. Much of Birbhum, for instance, returned to the jungle, and English forced the locals to cultivate opium in those vacant lands. And then flooded Chinese markets with India-grown opium. It didn't take much time for the Chinese to get addicted to opium, and then the English negotiated and traded Indian opium for Chinese tea. English made about $3 billion in 1830s through trading opium and tea, which rose to about $22 billion in 1870s, which in turn helped them to build a modern navy. While English rose to riches, the Chinese were facing an opium crisis. This irked the Chinese emperor, who in 1839 seized 1.2 million kilos of opium and dumped it into the sea. This act resulted in opium wars between 1839 and 1860. China was decimated and had to forfeit Hong Kong and legalize opium. English then traded tea across the world, and this led to the Tea Act, followed by the Boston Tea Party, which then resulted in American freedom struggle. Even though they were making money, the English were not very happy, since they still were dependent on Chinese for their tea supplies. So, they started exploring the options of growing tea within Assam in India, the territory that East India Company administered, as it discovered that tea plants grow in the wilderness of Assam. But English were not happy with the taste of this tea, so they sent a Scottish botanist named Robert Fortune into China disguised as a Chinese trader to learn the secrets behind the Chinese tea, since Chinese kept tea manufacturing a secret. Robert came back not only with the manufacturing learnings, he also smuggled several tea plants, plus he convinced 80 Chinese who knew the tea business to come along with him into India. After this, English learned that black tea is not a separate plant but a fermented version of the same green tea, and also learned that tea plant requires a certain weather and needs altitude. Later, English found Darjeeling to be the suitable region to grow these plants. Along with this, they also employed the same learnings in growing Assam tea plants, and to their surprise the tea yield from Assam was much superior in quality than that of the Chinese tea. Soon, the tea industry flourished in Assam. And since English colonized India, it employed Indians in this industry and subjected them to harsh inhuman conditions just like slaves, and forced them to generate higher throughputs. With this, the Assam tea was cheaper and better than the Chinese tea. Thus, the Chinese tea world exports dropped from 90% to meager 5%. The Indian tea manufacturers went on to supply tea across India through rail network, which then led to establishment of tea stalls across all the railway stations. The manufacturers also promoted tea in a big way with hoardings and pamphlets on how to brew tea. They also Indianized the advertisements by portraying families enjoying tea together. Post-independence, these advertisements reflected the free India and the freshness of tea, thereby remained relevant. Tea became one of the largest exports of independent India and the largest foreign exchange earner. So, what can India learn from this story of the Indian tea industry which India can adopt today? 1. There is always an opportunity to topple the leader, today China, in manufacturing, even if majority of market is being dominated by this player. 2. Everything is fair in trade and business, like how the English stole the secrets of tea, like how China is currently reverse engineering everything, and stealing the IPRs to create made in China products. China is unpopular to have reverse-engineered Soviet missiles, and it has also sold some of these to North Korea. The US also alleges that China hacked into its designs of fighter jet F-35 and created a very similar J-31. The way China grew in the last 20 to 30 years. It cannot be an organic growth. It entered markets with sub-optimal cheap products and then captured those markets by leveraging its scale, and today it is also capable of creating complex and quality products. So, as long as it serves the purpose, everything is fair. And sometimes the moral high ground may not serve the interest of the citizens. 3. Human resource. Today Indian human resource is cheaper than that of Chinese, due to differences in the per capita incomes. So, India have to leverage this and invest into industries that don't need high training requirements, like how China left the garments industry to Bangladesh, since it was less valuable, and with an aging population China now want to prioritize and invest the human capital only in valuable industries. Likewise, India needs to prioritize which industries to target. Industries that requires minimal investments in terms of training and then scale it. 4. Robert Fortune in the tea story stole not just the tea plants but also convinced 80 Chinese tea industry experts to come with him to India. This helped English to replicate the manufacturing processes in India. Similarly, India needs to attract or poach and convince the best talent available in the world to work for Indian industries or at least as consultants. Then leverage on this knowledge followed by scale. 5. Lastly, what not to learn. Like the Queen chartered the East India Company, which worked as Crown's proxy and expanded colonial rule. Likewise, the CCP had created state-run companies which have been taking over large industries through its investment potential, since the state has been backing them. But does it truly work in today's world? No, it doesn't. China is already facing a great backlash since nations are not trusting these companies anymore and are not willing to do business with them. The US has been leading here, and India took a step further by banning Chinese apps suspecting theft of user data. And it's believable. The large corporations of China have their executives as the members of CCP, like those of Huawei, Xiaomi etc. So, there is a good enough reason to not trust these corporations, as they are bound to share the data with CCP. India should avoid trading this path. The state-run companies are never going to be trusted outside of the state. So, India should let the market define the business and the businesses, without the government controlling these businesses. And if there is no domestic need, India should disinvestment from all the state-run PSUs. Now, let me elaborate further on what. What can India do from here? Remember I mentioned Genghis Khan initially. So to further answer the question of what, I will be telling the story of Genghis Khan and how he sieged Beijing, which was way more powerful than that of his army. In 1202, Temujin became the sole emperor of Mongolian plains after winning over all the rifts within the Mongol tribes. He then expanded his rule by waging ferocious wars, and his territory by the end of his life was 3 times that of the land of Alexander the Great and 2 times that of the Roman Empire, and so he was proudly referred to as Genghis Khan. China was a large empire and a very dominant force in his neighborhood, and as usual China didn't like an expanding force right next to theirs. So, China started to send the warning signals to Genghis Khan. But Genghis Khan, being Genghis Khan, didn't wait but took the war to China and declared war on Jin dynasty in 1212. But he faced a gigantic task ahead, since until then he had only won over smaller regions and tribes, but now he was to face a giant Jin dynasty in Beijing. His first hurdle came in the form of the Great Wall of China, which he and his troops crossed by walking around it. After this arduous task of walking around the Great Wall of China, they reached Beijing, but to their dismay the fort walls of Jin dynasty were formidable and tall. However, Genghis Khan was in no hurry, and so he decided he would stay outside the fort and lock the Chinese inside the fort and cut off their supplies. This meant Chinese couldn't come out and had run out of their food supplies. This left Chinese starving, and they even resorted to cannibalism. Once Chinese were starved for food and its army was demoralized, Genghis Khan marched into the fort, and it was not difficult for him to defeat the Chinese. Even though Chinese fought hard, they were a weakened force by then. Later on, Genghis Khan took the military knowledge and the expertise from Chinese and established his capital region in Karakoram. What learning does India have from this story of Genghis Khan's conquest of Beijing? 1. The all-powerful have their own weaknesses, and China too may be a formidable force now, but it has its own weaknesses. Which is the South China Sea, or its naval power, or its dependence on sea routes for oil supplies or the exports. India needs to exploit this vulnerability and, like Genghis Khan, should cut off routes for Chinese vessels in Indian Ocean. This will hit Chinese export-driven economy, plus also its oil supply would become questionable. 2. Take the fight to the enemy and at a place of your choice, and not let him get that fight to you, and a place of his choice. Genghis Khan, having sensed the Chinese unhappiness in his rise, didn't let them wage a war on him. Instead he moved fast and declared the war when Chinese were unprepared for a conflict. India should take this conflict at sea, through its naval forces and not let China take India to the Himalayas whenever it wishes to. It is alleged that China doesn't want to settle the line of actual control, the border disputes with India. And it wants to keep the conflict alive so as to divert India towards national security whenever it wants. 3. Negotiate from the position of strength. Today India have been negotiating with the People Liberation Army of China to move back to the status quo ante. But what India is offering them in return, during these negotiations? India should have something in its hand to negotiate from the position of strength. Like Genghis Khan first expanded into Beijing and then negotiated by taking back riches, machinery, and military expertise back to Karakoram. In the current context, India seemed to have followed the same and have moved its ground forces in certain other areas and has put them on the table for negotiations. India did this earlier with Sikkim too. India negotiated with China by recognizing its One China claim and by not recognizing Taiwan. In turn, China has recognized Sikkim as an integral part of India. 4. China values power and aggression, like it valued Genghis Khan, even though it was more dominant in military than the Mongols. It was reluctant in waging a war with Genghis Khan as it valued Mongolian power and feared their aggression. 5. Last and most important learning is blocking. Yes, like how Genghis Khan blocked the Chinese movement in and out of the fort. In today's world, India can pursue blocking the sea trade route of China. China would be suffocated due to depleted supply of oil and would get anxious when its exports face blockages. That's everything about tea and Genghis Khan, which India can learn and leverage upon.